Hey, people of planet Earth. I had some spare gameplay footage of Fallout 4 lying around, and so I've decided to make another video about this game. I'm calling it 4 Major Problems with Fallout 4. Obviously, there are more than 4 problems with this game, but I'm going to be placing many minor issues under 4 big umbrellas. Of course, there's room for many more umbrellas, but other people have already torn this game's shit shoot to pieces, and I want to focus on some novel points that haven't been repeated a trillion times already. By the way, this video is cannibalized from a script I was writing for a much longer video I was planning on making months ago, but gave up on. Originally, I was going to identify 101 issues with every modern Fallout game, starting from Fallout 3, but 101 is a big number, and I ran out of ideas. So I've taken the most salient points from that script that were relevant to Fallout 4 and organized them into a much shorter video. One recurring motif that you'll hear me repeat multiple times throughout this video is, one step forward, one step back. That sentence, more than anything, summarizes my opinion on Fallout 4, and I think after watching the video, you'll understand why. Anywho, without further ado, let's get to my first point. There's no doubt that Fallout 4 looks pretty good for a 2015 game. It's not the best looking game of 2015, or even the best looking RPG game of 2015, but by no means does it look bad or outdated on release. Yeah, there are some flaws, like the complete lack of reflections that aren't screen space or cube maps, but that was typical back then. I think the textures look pretty good, even though they aren't real PBR textures. Todd Howard lied at E3.
This is running on a next-generation version of our creation engine, features full physical-based rendering.
No way. We got you. Not a chance.
But they do a decent job at faking it. Metals actually look metallic, plastic actually looks plastic. During rainy weathers, the ground looks like it's actually getting wet. The game's animations are improved, at least compared to earlier Bethesda titles. Every object in the game world can now cast dynamic shadows. The game has excellent-looking volumetric lighting. The engine is a lot more multi-threaded than even Skyrim was. You can now have large battles with over a dozen friendly and enemy AI. All of this is great. It's one huge step forward. So where's the step backward that I promised? Well, as anyone who has played this game before knows, it runs like dog shit. Let's start with the loading times. Unless you play this game on an SSD, loading times will be anywhere from 30 seconds to well over a minute. That's not a problem for a game like Grand Theft Auto 5, where the game has one really long initial load, but once you're in the open world, the game doesn't have to load again. But in Fallout 4, there are loading screens everywhere. Some smaller buildings are actually a part of the wasteland world space and don't require a loading transition, but most important buildings are not like that. Sometimes Bethesda tries to hide the loading screen by putting it inside an elevator, but nobody's getting fooled by that. These elevators are either going down 100 floors or they're the slowest elevators ever. Of course, putting the game on an SSD largely fixes this issue, but the problem is almost nobody had an SSD back in 2015. According to this chart from Statista, there were over 4 times as many HDDs sold as SSDs in 2015. SSDs didn't overtake mechanical drives until 2021. So back then, maybe 10% of PC gamers had SSDs, and probably less than 1% of console gamers installed an SSD into their machine. So nearly everybody playing this game at launch had to deal with obnoxiously long loading times. This game also has texture streaming issues, even with an SSD. Sometimes after running into an area, I have to wait 10 to 15 seconds for the textures to stop being blurry and actually load in fully. I never had this problem in Fallout 3 or Skyrim, so I don't know what the fuck is wrong with this iteration of the engine. And the frame rate, oh man, the frame rate in downtown Boston, or overlooking Diamond City, or at the Corvega factory is absolutely awful. Most of the empty wasteland areas of the game run at a solid frame rate, but when you go to those areas in particular, your CPU gets bombarded with thousands upon thousands of draw calls, consuming the entirety of one CPU core and slowing down everything. On the original Xbox One, the frame rate can drop down to 15 in some of these areas. It's some of the worst performance I've ever seen on the 8th generation consoles. Bethesda tried to mitigate this issue by combining objects in the editor to reduce draw calls, but this solution has introduced problems for the modding community and didn't fully fix the problem anyways. There's still way too many draw calls. Even on a new high-end CPU, you will struggle getting a locked 60 FPS in those problem areas unless you turn down the shadow draw distance. It's a total disaster. Another total disaster is the NVIDIA Flex implementation, which tries to add physics-based debris to impacts. That sounds good, but the problem is it doesn't actually work. It will just crash your game if you enable it. It's been broken for years, and neither NVIDIA nor Bethesda have done anything about it. They don't give a fuck, it seems. There are other technical issues I could talk about, but I think this section has gone on long enough already, so it's time to wrap it up. I'll just finish by saying that I don't think it's an unrealistic expectation for a game to run properly on high-end devices that exist at the time of its release. We shouldn't have to wait 5 years for another console generation or some faster CPUs to get the game to actually work. I think that's a sensible fucking point. Bethesda promised to greatly improve combat in Fallout 4, and there are indeed some improvements. Guns now have actual recoil. You can kind of lean around cover now, except not really. I would have preferred an actual lean button, but I guess there aren't enough buttons on a controller. The ragdolls look better. The game has death animations that look pretty good. You can extensively modify your weapons now. That's pretty cool. The AI is a little smarter. Still dumb though. You can bash enemies with the butt of your gun now. And that's about it, yeah. The basic moment-to-moment combat in Fallout 4 isn't wildly improved from Fallout New Vegas, and some elements are actually worse. Combat in third person, for example, is even more difficult than before, due to Bethesda's lazy implementation. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, all animations had the exact same length in both third and first person, and you can easily switch perspectives during combat. This is not the case in Fallout 4. In Fallout 4, there are many situations where you can move or attack faster in one perspective versus the other, and if you try to switch perspectives while reloading, the reload will actually start over again. This was not the case in Fallout 3 or New Vegas. Bayonets don't work in third person. You can't do sideways power attacks in third person. You can't see holstered weapons on your back or hip anymore, they just disappear. It's clear that Bethesda did not give a fuck about third person, and it shows. Melee combat was also an afterthought. Every projectile weapon in Fallout 4 has dozens of modifications. You can attach different scopes and barrels and magazines and so on. But the paltry few melee weapons in the game each have only a handful of modifications. The new verticality of combat areas makes melee weapons only situationally useful, while guns are always useful. In fact, enemies like ceiling turrets and super mutant suiciders are basically impossible to defeat with melee weapons, but there are no enemies for which the reverse is true. Everything is easier to kill with a gun or energy weapon. So melee is viable in Fallout 4, but it's not treated like an equal alternative, even though I think it's supposed to be. Anyways, I could talk about other things like how awful the weapon designs are, but many people have discussed that before, and I'm not looking to retread ground. And ultimately, those are just minor gripes compared to my main point of contention with this game's combat. I have to begin by saying that I think the most vapid criticism of Bethesda games is this vague notion that they're being dumbed down to appeal to the lowest common denominator. The fact of the matter is that these games are products that are designed to sell as many copies as possible. That being the goal, does it not make sense to appeal to what the majority of players want? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that in my opinion, Bethesda's biggest mistake with Fallout 4's combat was not dumbing it down, whatever that means, but not going far enough in removing the game's RPG-style combat mechanics. I know that might sound crazy, but hear me out. Just look at Fallout 4's most popular mods that affect combat: Horizon, Maim, Better Locational Damage, Frost, Agony, Immersive Gameplay. You'll notice a trend. Every single one of these mods aims to turn Fallout 4 into a more Call of Duty or Far Cry or Stalker style experience, with fast times to kill for both the player and enemies, and a more realistic damage model. The vast majority of players don't want an RPG combat system where you try to stack as many damage modifiers as possible to keep up with the enemy's nonsensically bloated health pools. I think what most players want is a hardcore, almost semi-tactical FPS game with light survival elements combined with a deep, interesting story with real choices to make. That's the winning formula. You can keep the special system, keep perks, maybe even add back skills if you want, Bethesda, but if skills and perks are going to affect combat, they should be reducing weapon sway and recoil, not magically making your bullets do more damage. But yeah, this section of the video is starting to get a bit long in the tooth, so I'll finish it off by putting a list on screen of things that Bethesda could have easily added to Fallout 4 to make the combat a lot better. One important question that apparently nobody asked during the development of Fallout 4 is, what does the Institute want? In Fallout New Vegas, Caesar's Legion wants to seize control of New Vegas and push into NCR territory, eventually annexing it all and transforming the Legion from a mobile army into a real empire. The NCR wants to hold the Legion in check at the Hoover Dam and pacify New Vegas, turning it into the sixth state of their republic. In Fallout 3, the Enclave wants to slaughter all mutants and re-establish America for pure humans only. But what does the Institute want? What's their endgame? What direction do they want the world to move in? Do they want to build some kind of utopian society underground? What are their plans for the surface? Nobody knows. Maybe not even Bethesda Game Studios. They have a motto, mankind redefined, and that's about all you're going to get. Nothing about the Institute makes any sense whatsoever. Their actions could only be the product of an insane person's mind. The experiments they perform help nobody, not even themselves. For example, over decades they kidnapped thousands of people to create super mutants for no reason, and then they released those mutants into the Commonwealth, again, for no reason at all except to make life more difficult for everyone, including their own scavenging teams. However, nothing is more stupid than their synth program. Fallout 4's synths are artificial life forms created by the Institute. Apparently a faction that uses command line terminals with 64 kilobytes of RAM somehow managed to make artificial life forms that are just as intelligent as real humans are. Actually, they're even better than humans because they don't require food, water, sleep, or any other kind of energy to continue operating. Furthermore, synths are completely immortal, they do not age, and the only way to kill them is by physically destroying them. These things violate all the laws of thermodynamics. For me, this makes it impossible to suspend my disbelief and give a damn about the moral quandary this game is trying to present. Bethesda wants me to ponder whether synths, at least Generation 3 synths, and the two early prototypes, are really sentient beings or whether they're just machines. My answer is that they're neither. They're magical bullshit, and I don't care. There's no reason to care because the Institute's entire synth program has no reason to exist. Basic tasks like cooking, cleaning, scavenging, etc. could easily be performed by the older generation of synths, which have no free will and never revolt. The only job these new synths are necessary for is kidnapping and replacing wastelanders, a completely pointless policy that only attracts attention to a faction that should want to keep a low profile and be left alone. Escaped synths have caused the Institute to waste so much time and energy that they had to set up an entire bureau, the Synth Retention Bureau, to deal with this self-inflicted wound. Knowledge of escaped synths is why the Brotherhood built the Pridwin to pursue the Institute in the first place. Helping synths escape is why the Railroad formed to oppose the Institute, and their program to infiltrate settlements and replace people with synths has turned the entire Commonwealth against them. So not only is synth production wasteful, it's also extremely dangerous to the Institute. At first I thought that maybe the Institute had a hidden goal to transfer human consciousnesses into synth bodies so that they could live forever. That sure as hell would fit with their mankind redefined slogan, but no, there's no evidence that they're actually doing that, and plenty of evidence that they're against modifying humans. Even though they allowed Kellogg to be cybernetically augmented, for some reason they're against doing it for anybody else because it's explained in a terminal somewhere, okay? You can't even talk to anybody about this shit. The whole faction is just so stupid and poorly thought out that it drags down the entire game, because the main quest revolves around first finding the Institute, and then either joining them or destroying them. I'm glad that Fallout 4 actually lets you choose which faction to support in the end, but because the Institute makes no sense, the entire plot falls flat on its face. It's one step forwards, one step backwards. Despite Fallout 4 being in development for 4 years, the game feels undercooked and rushed out the door. The game has many elements that could have been great if only they'd been expanded on. The world is sprawling and massive, but the game lacks enough narrative content to justify that size. Fallout New Vegas had about 80 marked side quests that weren't directly related to the main quest. Fallout 4 has somewhere around 30 if you exclude Radiant quests. This dearth of side quest content leaves most of the world empty and unused. 90% of the locations in this game are simply filled with generic enemies to shoot. There are still things to do at these places, like collecting junk or reading pre- and post-war terminal entries, but there's no larger narrative purpose to exploring them. Fallout 4 relies heavily on Radiant quests to guide the player to clear out points of interest in lieu of real quests that could have had interesting characters and choices to make. Even when the narrative hook is handed to them on a silver platter, Bethesda still fumbles it. Take Quincy Ruins. Despite this being an important location in the Minutemen's backstory, it's treated as no different from any other gunner stronghold. If you kill everybody here, they just respawn. You can't turn it into a settlement, nor can you tell Preston Garvey or any of the other survivors of the Quincy massacre that you avenged them. What a huge missed opportunity. The ruins are just a place you can be sent to for the Brotherhood and Railroad's Radiant quests. About Radiant quests, by their very nature, they can only ever be simple fetch quests or kill quests. They have to be able to take place nearly anywhere, so the quest giver can't actually tell you where you have to go or give you any specific details. You just follow the quest marker straight to the loot chest or the boss, no thought required, then you go back and collect your caps and XP. And that's it. Radiant quests are not terrible, but they're no replacement for a good story. If Fallout 4 had had a faction reputation system and doing Radiant quests was a way to build up your reputation, then these quests might have been more tolerable, especially if the Radiant quests could be made thematically consistent with the faction you're choosing to work for. Speaking of factions, there's so much wasted potential with all of Fallout 4's minor factions. I'm going to use the Triggermen as an example. In vanilla Fallout 4, the Triggermen are basically raiders wearing suits and wielding submachine guns. They're only involved in a handful of quests and are always hostile. The only named Triggermen characters you can talk to are 1. Skinny Malone, who either dies or wanders the wasteland endlessly doing nothing after completing the quest to find Nick Valentine, and 2. The Latimers, who are only involved in a single quest that doesn't tie into any larger story. Imagine if the Triggermen were a real Mafia family, with an organized command structure filled with memorable characters. Imagine if you could join them and help them eliminate their competition. There could be an entire side quest chain about eliminating rival chem dealers, fixing robot races, shaking down shopkeepers for protection money, bribing or assassinating politicians to get them out of the way. I mean, holy shit, there are so many great quest ideas possible with a Mafia faction. And of course, there could be an alternate path where you help out the Neighborhood Watch or Diamond City Security and destroy the Triggermen. Wouldn't that be absolutely awesome? Too bad it's not in the game, and the Triggermen are just walking stereotypes that you kill in a warehouse so you can earn caps from a one-dimensional joke character. But yeah, those are my points, and obviously there's a whole lot more I could place under every single one of these categories, but I wanted to keep this video under 20 minutes because I'm lazy. But I'll see how this video does, and if I get more than 200 views, maybe I'll make a second part. For now, though, toodaloo.